think everyone here pretty much knows me. I'm Jennifer Valkos, the owner of the gallery. And we're so privileged to have Sabre as one of our featured artists. And her show's been amazing. So we're so excited to have you, and thank you. One thing that the clients always ask me, they say, how do you meet artists? How do you know Sabre? And I have to say, Jeffrey will be my question. That's how we meet artists, usually through other artists.
Yeah.
So it's been an exciting process. So yeah, let's tell us about your work and tell us. I mean, there's so many questions. Actually, we have tons of questions. But this is very informal dialogue. So please chime in. And a lot of people couldn't make it tonight because they're on vacation or stuck in traffic. So just ask as many questions as you'd like, and very informal artist conversation. And just call it.
I came to Jennifer about a year ago and said, I'm reading this really fabulous book, and it's called Black and White Thinking, and I really want to do a body work about it. And she's like, okay. Then I showed her the cover, and it's basically a figure, a head, but it has like dots of color all over it. And that speaks to me. And so it's this British guy, and it's very light and funny, but it's also very relevant because it talks about what we're doing right now, how we're dealing with the pandemic, how we're dealing with Black Lives Matter, how we're dealing with the end of the Trump era, how we're dealing with all the things that have happened in these past 2 years, and probably even a little bit before that. And what does it mean as the body public, of the world globally? How are we handling things? And it's not a pretty picture, honestly. We've become so divided. It's very left, right, wrong. And so he goes into that of how basically the way we're wired from a long, long time ago is that we like to categorize. We like to categorize everything. It gives us comfort to know that's good, that's bad. And so that's why even people like, give us a rating, 5 stars, right? I mean, everything, the way that we talk these days is very hyperbole. It was the best, it was the worst. And so that's why I thought, well, actually, and what he's talking about, and the other book, Think Again, is talking about is that we're actually a lot more in the middle. We think we want to categorize like that, but we actually struggle a lot more with the naming of things and the categorizing of stuff. And so that's what I wanted to do with this show, is show that there's actually a lot more beauty and a lot more essence of love in the middle, as opposed to constantly trying to have this tug of war internally. That if we just really engage ourselves in that process of thinking and rethinking and trying to really process a little bit more intuitively and a little more specifically, as opposed to rush to judgment. And so I just felt like it was really important right now because there's so much dialogue and work and things of people thinking that is so heavy, and I'm exhausted. So I just want to have work that makes me feel good again. And so and I also want to engage with color, and that's what I told her, is that I want to work with color theory again. It's one of my favorite things. I was taught a couple of different ways of doing the palette. One way is to do like a rainbow effect and go around that way, but in working more, I went to Philadelphia Academy of Fine Arts and took some workshops with this guy who's like, put the warm on the one side and cool on the other and do battle in the middle. And that's the way I approach my color theory, that's how I get those nuances of those midtones and those grays and things like that. So most of the colors that I mix are not from the tube. I don't do tube greens, I don't do tube lavenders or purples or anything like that, or oranges. I make all of those tertiary, secondary colors myself, because I think that they are more vibrant and they're more rich and glorious that way. So that's what I wanted to work with again in this body of work, is seeing all those nuances of color.
So a lot of the questions that I get, they're like, okay, what are these numbers? What do they mean? The letters that are in the background of the paintings, do those spell out anything? Do they mean anything?
Well, okay, so I am very fascinated by music just because of all the different ways that we think about it. Music to me is first an emotional experience because it's something that we feel, we remember, everything is like, oh, that song, I remember when that song came out, and we have a memory about it, but it brings us such great joy. But I'm so fascinated about how actually composers compose. What did they go through? A lot of times it's like, well, how did artists come up with that? Well, I'm fascinated with why do musicians, how did they figure that out? And they have their own mathematical code that they use. And so for me, I'm an existentialist. It comes from the energy of the world, and somehow they conjure that down into this beautiful array of melodies and harmonies, and I love that. But so I wanted to show what they do in order to create a melody, and it's these dots and notes and an alphabet that musicians read to understand how to play it. And so I was like, that is so cool. I love that. And so I wanted to put that, and I use clouds as a metaphor because to me, that's what we're all doing when we're trying to come up with something. I like the idea of fog, that to me, that unknown is very foggy and very uncertain. I mean, we feel kind of disoriented when we're in fog, you know, we're always like, dang, fog, you know, but I like that because I feel like that's what we're doing a lot of times is we're trying to figure stuff out. So I would probably continue to use the clouds as a metaphor, but that's what the dots and the lines, particularly in the music pieces, mean. In some of the other work, I use numbers because I'm thinking about how mathematicians describe how we're trying to figure out our problems. It's very mathematical, it's very, you know, there's a lot of people that talk about how our brains are very similar to computers, but we're not. I mean, we're not like computers at all because we're very imperfect. You know, we use our emotions, we use our experiences, our memories, and all of that to actually come up with these very imperfect, very unusual arrays of things, and that's what I'm usually struggling with, is how to figure that out. So that's what the numbers mean. And all that stuff means is, you know, why? You know, it's like this one in particular with the ones and zeros. So that's what this one is about, is, you know, that computer coding, that binary code. And there's a lot of psychologists that talk about that the original way that we try to find something out is, like I said, this categorization of right and wrong. It's very binary, it's very structured. It's a construct that we have and we understand right from wrong. But creativity means we have to go off that grid. We have to go off that construct in order to find a new way of doing things, and that's what the dots mean. Because we're going to try to find, you know, things that are similar and say, aha, I got that. But now I want to find a new way to do it. And so that's why it does that. And you'll see that energy in most of my work behind it, because to me that's where everything comes from, is that life energy, that life force.
And by the way, this one changed colors like 5 times today. It was almost trippy, like when you would walk by, you got a little shift in energy, and it's almost like it was like 3D or something.
And I use a lot of pure pigment when I'm doing blues. I mix my own oils, and I think that's why it gets that really rich quality of blue to it.
It's just gorgeous. It moved along with the lighting of the day.
Yeah, cool. So I think that this piece, I had some questions about it, and I was saying sometimes I feel like we have this tug of war again about, like, well, if I went with the red, it would go like this, or if I did the blue, it looked like that. And we have this, I call it the Ben Franklin list almost, of how we're trying to figure out and categorize, well, how do we go through our process of coming to a conclusion? And that's what this is about. And then I'm also looking at, of course, formal things in the composition of trying to create that energy. I really want it to look like it's going in and it's coming out, that it's like this, I don't know, trippy. What is it doing? And so I started playing with the lines and the grids and making the grids get smaller and making them get larger. And that's something that's kind of been new probably for the last 8 months that I've been doing at some of my work, is trying to, because I was doing that with my sculpture. I was making the sculptures do this twisting and vortexy thing, and I wanted to see if I could do it in the paintings.
And that reminds me of a question that I should have started in the beginning. Would you say that this show is like a 4-part series? You've got a little bit of architecture, a little bit of geometry, a little...
I know, and it is. It's like
color therapy.
There's so many different ways to describe how we come up with answers that I felt like, you know, we talked about that when we were putting this together, of like, well, is it too much for people to really come up with to understand what it is that I'm talking about? But it's almost like many sides of the sense of self. You know, I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a wife. And all those different ways of thinking of myself means that sometimes I have a different way of dialogue in my head. And I kind of think of it like that, that it's okay to experience problem solving from different ways, tackling it from different avenues. And that's what I'm doing because I'll work one way, but then I'll work completely a different way. And it's like, am I schizophrenic? Do I have ADD? What is my problem? But I feel like that's because there's so many different ways of describing it. And because I'm an avid reader, I'm constantly reading all these different books about, like I said, the way people think about stuff. And it's like, oh, that's cool, let's try that, you know? And so it just keeps me interested, I guess, because it's novel and it's allows me to stretch my creative muscle a little bit.
And speaking of a muscle,
Yeah.
I wonder how your dreamlike state inspires you with the pieces, because it almost is like a trance, neurological kind of vortex of a matrix. With especially with this piece, it's my favorite.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think that a lot of times when I've had a day at the studio, I'll dream. I problem solve in my sleep, and I'll wake up and I'll go, yeah, like a eureka moment, like that's what I want to do. And even like the plexiglass pieces, I mean, I'm trying to figure this out of like, okay, because I do approach everything more from a sense of inquiry, like a hypothesis of like, well, if I tried it this way, what would happen? And so that means I'm having to face my sense of fear and my sense of failure. That if I do this thing that's really scary because I don't know what's going to happen, is it going to be okay? And I just have to say, yeah, I have to have a little bit of courage and go, okay, let's give it a try, you know. And I don't know a lot of times. I'll do sketches and stuff like that. I work from a sketchbook, and I'll try out some simple things, and then I'll work on paper. But I don't always know, because when I approach a canvas, I just let it kind of take over. I let the process evolve. So I don't have I didn't know what this one was gonna, and a lot of times I'm like, is it done? You know, I mean, we all have the question, right? Is it finished? Did I say enough? And a lot of times when I don't know what to say next, that's when I stop, because obviously I don't have anything else. So that's the end. That's all.
You know, I think one of the ways these really work is it looks like you lose yourself in them. And that's exactly what you're trying to express, is that you can't capture yourself in one way.
Right.
So it's really beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and it, you know, like I said, just a lot of it, like I said, is that sense of existentialism for me, is that, you know, I kind of, when I was trying to figure out, like, what is it that I want to do as an artist, and why do I want to do that, I started looking into, like, actually the God particle, and I'm like, okay, now I'm really losing it. I'm reading so infinitesimally small of who it is. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a person? And that means a lot of times that we can't find the answers, because we don't know. You know, I just know that we're here for a reason, we're here to exist, and we're all connected. And I'm looking at those connections in every way possible to figure it out. So anyway,
Yeah, let's keep walking through.
we keep walking through. So I've been working with this idea of the construct. Like I said, you know, this right and wrong, this, you know, I have to stop when the light's red. And who came up with that? I mean, you know, like people will say money is a construct, you know, and to me, that construction, architectural, that all seems to make sense to me. And I have been thinking about this idea for a long time, but I haven't really done any oil paintings around it. I've been doing a lot of drawings with these boxes, this just free flow box. And this is the first time that I put it into a painting. And then at the same time, because I was looking at the meet me in the middle, I wanted to see if I could not only do an architectural feeling piece, but that I could work through the color grid of these different colors on the color wheel and just meet in the middle and find out what those colors would look like, and give it depth and have all the formal considerations going on at the same time. So that's how that came about. Does anybody have any questions about it or anything? Am I making sense?
Do you think about the male process of thinking, or is it just it's a universal male-female? Do you mind
thinking about male versus female, because that's a construct as well. You know, I mean, in my classes, I was taught that X and Y is how we know things, but there's a lot of going on in between that, you know, we don't really understand a lot of it, and we're just learning about it, I think, more and more, about all of the things when we take that norm, you know, right, wrong stuff out of there, that we allow people to be people, you know, and we just, that's
so
okay.
Married couples need to hear that. You
Yeah,
just-
just allow people to be people. I mean, but I don't really think about it necessarily in my work exactly.
Right.
But I am thinking about selfhood, you know, what's going on up here for sure, absolutely. Yeah. But I can say that so back here is more of this construct, so maybe we'll look at the installation. So a lot of my method of the way that I'm doing things is to start with sculpture or installation, because it helps me figure out what do those patterns look like. So I have to make stuff real. Long time ago, before 2009, I was taking pictures and doing paintings from the pictures. So I would basically look at the composition of what I wanted to do, if it was a street scene or something that I had seen, and then take that and put it into a composition. But when I quit doing that and taking that process out, I felt like, well, how am I going to talk about something so complex like this and read all these really dense, really smart things, but how do I make it for real on my own? And it means it has to be a sculpture to figure it out, because they're really talking about some very specific geometry, some very specific math that's going on. So this one actually started the other way. It has mild steel at the top, and then I flipped it, and I don't know why I like to hang things from the ceiling, but I do. You'll still see the energy, the spiral through, but then I wanted to work on this idea of the construct of this doors and windows and what it would look like. And I wanted it to be something kind of impossible. A building doesn't have something that has a foundation that's got string on the bottom. So I wanted it to be something weird and something kind of impossible. I feel like I look at that when I go to the coast and I see those buildings that look like they're basically sitting in water. There's some of them in Charleston, and I just keep looking at them and thinking, but how is that possible that there's this building coming out of water? And that kind of is what I was going for when I did this, because I do feel like sometimes we create arguments and stories in our head that basically are built on not very good foundational thinking. And that's what this kind of reminds me of, is that sometimes we have these false narratives and they don't really make a lot of sense. And I've been guilty of that myself sometimes, so I can't say that I'm perfect, but that's what happens. And these little window panes are actually silkscreen prints, and I took a monoprint class, and so they're either my silkscreen transfers or actually this specialized monoprint practice that I've forgotten the specific name of it, and it's printed on these mylar sheets, and it just seemed appropriate to kind of put them in there.
So out of all these mediums that you're working on, do you have a favorite?
No, I don't. I mean, I really, it's kind of like having a favorite child, I mean, we like them all for different reasons, but they're all unique, and they all kind of fit together for me. And I like it that we can have those different flavors and still be talking about the same thing, and yet it's a different way of looking at it. So but then I'll be tired of something. It's like, I don't want to wear that dress anymore. I've worn it enough, it's time to put it away. So, I mean, I like to do the installation, the sculpture, and then I'm like, okay, I don't want to do it anymore. And then I'll want to paint about it instead, or I'll want to tackle it with the silkscreen prints or something like that. So, I guess I do maybe have a little bit of ADD. But so then that's where these came about. And this is, to me, this one reminds me of people talking at each other instead of talking to each other. Doesn't it feel like there's just a lot of punching going on? Yeah. And that is kind of what I feel like some of our process in our politics right now is that we are talking at, we're not talking with. Mm-hmm. And so this is a reverse process where I did all these hash marks and then I erased into it and then I built in further. And then this is charcoal and pastel and all different kinds of medium, because I wanted to find that messy middle. But I feel like there's a lot of, those talking heads just.
I love that. A lot of compliments that you get, they say, I feel like I walked away a little smarter after reading. It definitely makes you stop and ponder a little bit longer, I think.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Or they study, so it's fun on a daily basis to witness the general public examining the pieces.
Well, and that's where I feel like I want to meet people where they are as far as how they perceive art. I mean, I feel like art needs to enrich, but it also shouldn't be something that it hits you over the head sometimes. I feel like it needs to have the ability something to be that you can live with. Something that you want to look at over and over again because you find something new in it, so that it's complex enough to keep your interest. But I'm a joyful person. I'm an optimist, and I don't want to make work that makes you feel bad about something. I want to make work that makes you feel like, okay, there's hope, there's possibilities. We're not done yet. We might be messy right now, but it's going to be okay. And that's I guess where I'm coming from.
And expansion, I guess, it helps you to expand your conscience.
Yes.
Don't you think?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. Thanks. So then the dot series, so I'm looking at the idea of inside that cloud, what do those molecules look like? I'm not doing any lines on it, I'm not connecting them, I'm just letting them kind of hover in this state of, what do you call that? I've forgotten the name of it. It's, I call them the aggregate for lack of a better word, which is kind of like when things just kind of settle into this, I'm forgetting the word, into this body of atmosphere. And if anybody can think of it, let me know what it's called, but that's what I'm trying to figure out is how do those things just kind of stay in that homeostasis. And it allows me to work through color theory again, you know, so black versus white and the different tones in the middle, or, you know, like the raindrops coming down again out of a cloud. And I have another one over here. So I'm looking at color theory as well. Yeah, like little, you know, like have you ever seen it? You think your house is clean and you look through the window and then you see all that dust particles kind of going. Yeah. Like, oh yeah, it's kind of like that. And then here's another one that, working with that grid that's going in again. I'm really fascinated with this because I wasn't sure what was going to happen when I did them. But I'm really happy with the way these are turning out, and I probably will make more work like this. This idea of merging and emerging, and you know, allowing it to have this real trippy perspective shift thing going on. I think any questions about anything?
And we sold this one. Oh. Wonderful collector. So that was exciting, and they're going to be over the moon once it's sold.
Well, Sabre, talk about this. This is your new. This is the
last piece I did.
The last piece. Because a lot of people aren't familiar with Cambridge, I don't think.
Right, so I did this in Cambridge, and that was a residency program, and I went up, and when you do a residency, a lot of times it's like, okay, what can I accomplish in the 2 weeks that I'm there? And so a lot of times people don't actually finish anything, but they start something. So I started this at Cambridge, and I finished it back in the studio, but I really wanted to look at that transition from one thought to the other, to try to explain, I guess, for myself maybe, and to put this in order of like, how can you go from one thing to the other? And how do those patterns lead to another pattern? And so that's what this one is doing, is that they all make sense to me, but I want to see what it would look like going from one to the other. And maybe this is probably the next jumping off point for me, is something that I'll start to look at even more. So, you know, I have my constellations, which is where I started with these patterns of just this mathematical thing of looking at the square. And then I go into the squares and do this construct thing. But the squares are very numbered based because they have a very right, wrong, yes, no, you know, 90 degree. So I go into the numbers. But then the numbers also relate very much to a grid with the dots. But then the dots can be connected different ways. So I go into these, you know, that looks a little bit more like my installation work where the yarn is pulling in different ways. But then I start bringing in the musical notes because I feel like it's another way of pulling off that creative process. And so I go back into the musical notes being connected similar to how my music boxes work. And then I let that atmosphere kind of percolate through, and just, that's where it ends, is that just free flowing.
Love it. And did you use vellum on this one?
Yeah, so this is different. This is a new way of working for me because I love people who work in this archival pigment print process. And so these are archival inks, and it's on vellum, and then I basically glued it onto canvas. So it used to be that I worked this tight, and then you can see what's happened to my process as I've matured as an artist. But that was the illustrator in me, was these very, very tight renderings that I used to do back when I was an undergrad, a long, long time ago. So it's kind of fun to go back and do these tight drawings again, these little pieces. So it was a very enjoyable process. But I'm hoping that you'll see that that's why, I mean, this can make sense, and that's what I wanted this to be. It was kind of like a period at the end of the sentence of saying, okay, it does all go, right?
Right.
So, yeah. And as far as installations go, I brought my little pieces. These are pieces that I did in 2015, these little sculptures. And I fell in love with this idea. And this is what I started to take to the room size. But this is kind of, I wanted to make them like the size of someone's head, of what's going on inside someone's brain. And so I love making these little boxes. But it's this in between, that complexity of coming up with what's the right thing to do. So that's what those are. So, well, thank you. I mean, if anybody has any questions or anything, I'm happy to try to answer it.
You're very technical and very ethereal. So it's both of those words are, those are counterintuitive words.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I love everything, and it's just, I love women in art because we're a little thoughtful with the integrity, and then also just the thought and being ethereal and soft and thoughtful and hard, since we possess so much of the feminine energy. And you kind of touched on this, and then the masculine energy resonates. And I love being in the masculine energy, especially with, conversation or creatively, where we have to be kind of direct and
right.
So
yeah.
it just takes me through your consciousness. So I'm enjoying looking at your consciousness.
Great,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
Well, and also a very interesting point on Sabre. And early on in your career, you were featured in like 9 different galleries throughout the U.S.
Right.
Or globe. I'm not sure if you were overseas. And when you speak of integrity, you decided to depart from that. I'm sure it was a very lucrative 9 galleries,
Yeah.
and to hold what was true to you.
Yeah.
You went on this huge departure. It was more impressionistic paintings, right, and figurative and landscape, which
I know. I mean, it reminds me very much of the process that, and I hope that I would emulate someone like a Picasso, who started very realistic, and through the lifespan of his work, what happened, and some people will look at his retrospective and go, whoa, I didn't see that coming. But I feel like that's what a lot of artists, we need to give artists the ability to do that, because it's kind of like, when someone asks me, well, why did you change? I'm like, well, did you want to keep doing the same job you did when you graduated from college? Remember that little peon sales job you had? Did you still want to do that? So we have to allow ourselves to progress and to be able to grow. And for me, that came right at that 2008, 2009 timeframe. The market was going crazy, and I was like, if I have a chance to do a reset button, this is the time to do it. I want to take a deeper dive, and I want to feel like I'm not making, the market started really playing into what I was doing, and I know artists struggle with this, because we think about like, well, what's going to sell, what's going to happen, and that voice was getting louder and louder, and I became very unsure of who it was that I wanted to be as a creative person. And so I thought, I've got to go find myself again, and that means I just need to be able to be very vulnerable and accept the fact that I don't know everything of what I want to make, and I don't know who I want to be. And that's that process of just saying why, and being open to change. And so here I am. So this is the first gallery solo show that I've had since 2008. And so, I mean, I did what the guy that I hold high is Terry Winters, and he works a lot with this idea of this unseen thought process stuff too. And he said when he graduated from school, he waited 5 years. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna give myself that grace. I'm not going to try to be, represented or try to do anything. I'm just gonna dig deep and just have faith that it's gonna be okay. And so, this is, thank you, Jennifer, for having faith in me, because
Thank you so much.
I'm so thrilled to have this body of work together. I mean, it's interesting when it's in your studio and you're stacking it and you're kind of like, but to see it on the wall collectively in beautiful light means so much, because it's like, it's got breathing space, and it's just such a wonderful experience to be able to do this. So, yeah.
So you said 2008 was like your reset, and 2020 was kind of a reset for several artists, especially emerging themselves with solely being in the house and really not being inspired by things outside of the world, but more so in their consciousness.
Right.
What series kind of was that for you?
What was I working on? So 2020, I was doing the music series. I was doing the whole harmony thing. I mean, outside my studio, it was down at Castleberry at the time. And outside my studio is sirens and protesting and just like this stuff going on. And I was like, I just need to turn on the music and find my happy place and just try to breathe. So that's what I was making, was the pieces about harmony and trying to find harmony, just for my own sanity.
I mentioned that it felt like jazz.
Yes, and that was what ended up happening. So the work started with classical, and I was listening to classical, but then as the sounds started getting louder, I switched to jazz, and actually a lot of Earth, Wind, and Fire. Which I could like bop away to, you know, and just, you know, and yeah, a lot of really cool jazz, and so happy. And so the work that body is from is called The Jazz of Physics. It's an awesome book. Really super smart guy again, who's looking at all the different ways that music comes into our life, and actually a lot of it is John Coltrane. So I was using his diagram of John Coltrane, and I did an installation that hangs from the ceiling, and it looks at how that rainbow of color from music, because you know, energy is also color because it's a vibration, and so that's that rainbow. So it has like a rainbow effect where it starts with the disc of John Coltrane at the top, and it kind of winds its way through this cloud of coated wire, and then ends in a wind chime at the bottom. So that was part of that body of work.
Yeah, it felt like that blue into green,
Yeah.
especially this piece too.
Mhm.
Coltrane's my favorite. So.
Love Coltrane, yeah. And the song that plays along with it is After the Rain. And it's just like this, just super cool. Like I can imagine when he was thinking about that, of coming out. Have you ever been like, you have had this heavy rain and then the steam's coming up from the sidewalk, and it's just kind of this blissful moment because the sun's come out. And that's what that piece reminds me of, is just that moment we experience that of like, you know, it's a beautiful piece.
It is.
So cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Hope it made sense. Yeah, and thank you for coming out to hear me talk about it. I mean, I think all artists want to connect. We want to share. The reason we're making it is because, you know, it's in our creative spirit, but it feels so good to be able to explain it and to share it with people. It's, you know.
So what's next?
What's next? This question.
I'm working right now on another pattern that I've been looking at, which is off of 1,000 Plateaus from Deleuze and Guattari, the French philosophers. Is rhizomes, it's social media. I had done an installation about it before, and it looks at how urban legends start. You can't really tell, like, I know it's true, if you drink blah blah blah, you're gonna be cured from COVID. Where does this stuff come from? You know, so it looks at that with, you know, how this Facebook stuff and, you know, QAnon and all that kind of stuff, but it basically is described as rhizomes. So that's what I'm working on, is a rhizome installation, and it will be roughly 9 by 9. It's going to be at Atlanta Contemporary, the wall for the studio program. So I'm going to do that for the June 11th. June 11th.
You're going to be there?
Yeah.
Will you be there that night?
I will not be there, the artwork will be
you'll
there.
be there.
But yeah, so that's what I'm working on, and it's weaving this wire to look like roots is very labor intensive. It takes a while to do it, so it's several months worth of work. Yeah, but so it's in process, and I'm like, hurry up, you know, I'm my own taskmaster. You know, so I need to come in on the weekends and work on this. So
I mean, everyone's amazed. The discipline behind the people. Like, this was probably 7 months of work.
yeah, if not more. I mean, yeah.
So it can be shocking for some artists because they're like, how did she do all this?
Yeah, I mean, I started reading that book last January, and we were talking about Meet Me in the Middle, I think, in June. And that's when I think that was the first piece, was that one, with the red and the blue.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing work. So what advice would you give artists? How can they
Stay in your lane.
stay in your lane?
Stay in your lane. Do what you do best. Be authentic to yourself. And we have to face our fears. We have to be okay with making mistakes. And it's okay. And I think probably the best advice I ever got was from a professor who said, when you start something, you have this really great idea, this cloud idea, that, you know, the best idea, it's going to be awesome, it's way up there. And maybe we don't know how to make that right now. So make what you know how to make now. That's why I started that big. Because that's what I knew how to make at that time. I didn't know how to do it any bigger. But you have to start with materials that you feel comfortable with and a process that you think you can handle, and then you grow it from there. And then you just keep taking one more whack at it, and I think that's how we gain that mastery and that sense of, okay, I know what I'm talking about now, because I've been doing it for a while. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, we could talk all night.
Yeah.
Much more to go through, but
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.